Hello and welcome to Arctic Corner. This is episode number 25, and today we will be discussing the difference between USF and RSF square footages. We will also briefly discuss what is BOMA and look over some of the requirements BOMA has for office buildings. This theme was requested by Miriam K, and what I can only guess is a nickname, Peached64. So if you guys are watching, I hope you guys like this. Hello there, my name is Josue Diaz. I'm a licensed architect in the state of California, and today I will be your host. To explain this theme, I would like for you guys to follow along with me in a make-believe example. Johnny here has an idea, and he invests a few $1,000,000 in constructing an office building, which he is hoping to rent out and make money for himself. Sounds good enough, right? The idea is that he has an office building constructed with 5 floors, and each floor will have 25,000 square feet. So it's reasonable to assume then that he will have 125,000 square feet that he can rent out. But it isn't that easy. Let's find out why. Let's assume for a minute that Johnny does find 3 tenants for his second floor. He finds Miriam, Kathy, and Lily. 3 successful businesswomen who now find this space, and it has the area that they need, and it's in a part of town that they wanted. As we start showing the space that each one of them is taking, perhaps you already find out what the problem is. Yeah, when you add up the spaces for Miriam, Kathy, and Lily, we realize that there isn't 25,000 square feet. Remember, Johnny was expecting that each floor would have 25,000 square feet that he could rent out. But as we can see from the spaces that these 3 gals are taking, they simply don't add up to 25,000 square feet. So what does he do? Well, he figures out a formula where he takes the square footage of the entire building and he divides it by the usable space that these tenants are taking. He comes up with a load factor of 1.25, which in itself is a 25% load factor. So Johnny takes each one of the 3 suites, multiplies them by 1.25, and he gets the area he was expecting to rent out to begin with. In other words, like we mentioned already, he adds 25% to each one of these spaces. So now comes the hard part. He has to go tell Miriam, Kathy, and Lily what has happened. Now he's going to have these conversations with all 3 of them separately. But for the sake of this example, let's continue with Miriam. He goes up to Miriam and has the following conversation. He says, Miriam, I understand that your office space is only 9,000 square feet. But you're also going to be using the restrooms, the common areas, and the other building amenities that the building has to offer. Therefore, to make up for those spaces, I'm going to tack on a 25% load onto your square footage. Therefore, although your office space is only 9,000 square feet, I am going to charge you 11,250 square feet. So that's the concept of usable versus rentable. The space that Miriam wants to use versus what the owner wants to rent. Now, as you can imagine, when Miriam first hears this idea, she's a bit shocked. She starts asking questions. She might understand to a certain extent what the owner wants, but she might ask herself, or she might ask him, well, do I have to pay for the stairs as well? I mean, the stairs are used by everybody, not just me, and not just by the tenants on this floor, but everybody in the building. Do I have to pay for a part of that too? Obviously, there starts to be some disagreements as to what is reasonable and what isn't. And that's where BOMA comes into play. By the way, BOMA stands for Building Owners and Managers Association. And they've created a standard so that when buildings are measured, in this case Johnny can get his fair share, while at the same time the tenant doesn't pay too much. We're not going to talk about all the specifics on how to measure per BOMA standards, but we're going to talk about some of the standards that BOMA has for office buildings. And that's another key, that depending on the type of the building, BOMA has different measurement requirements or measuring requirements. Therefore, the way that you measure a warehouse may not be the same way you measure a building or a retail center, so just have that in mind. So once again, let's talk about Miriam's example. Let's start with the space for her office. All exterior walls are measured to the inside face of the wall. So sorry, Johnny, you can't measure to the outside of the wall. Exterior glass walls are measured to the interior of the glass line. if the glass takes 50% or more of the vertical space up to the ceiling above. If it's less than 50%, then it's measured to the inside face of the wall. Next, demising wall between tenants. Those are measured at the center line of the wall. That way each tenant pays half of the wall. And the walls between the tenant and pretty much any other space are measured to the inside wall from the tenant's side. This includes walls that are separating the tenant from, for example, shafts, common areas, building corridors, building amenity rooms, etc. They're all measured to the inside of the tenant's wall. Last but not least, there are times when there are alcoves created at the entry of the tenant's suite. In most instances, these alcoves are also included in the square footage of the tenant's office usable area. Now, there are specific requirements as to how much space can actually be accounted for or be part of the tenant square footage. But we're not going to get into that specific as to how much of that alcove, if any, can be accounted. But just have in mind that in most instances, you are able to account for that alcove. So, as it pertains to the square footage of the tenant's usable space, if we were to draw a boundary line, the concept of the boundary line would be as we show here on a red boundary. Now let's talk about common areas briefly. As we already discussed, some of these common areas can be added to the usable area and create a rentable square footage, and that's why they are important. So what areas can you add on to make that rentable square footage? Well, in short, you can pretty much add all of the areas with the exception of vertical shafts, stairs, and if there was an area open to the floor below, that as well. None of those areas can be part of the rentable square footage. So if we were to draw a boundary line of the areas that could be added to the rentable square footage, it will conceptually look as drawn here. And the areas that cannot be part of the rentable square footage, the conceptual boundary is drawn here in purple and crossed out. And well, Johnny, that's just the way it is. You cannot include those areas as part of your rentable square footage. So you can see there's a balancing act here so that the owner can get as much square footage as he can, but also being reasonable with the areas that are not going to be added onto the tenant's rentable square footage. And that, my friends, is basically what BOMA does, at least these standards. Now, a few comments and opinions before this video is over if you're still watching. In this example, we showed at the initial part how Johnny had a 25% load. Now, just FYI, that is crazy. That's a pretty high load factor. At least in 2021 here in Northern California, a normal load factor, just so that you know, is between 14 to 18%. That's just relatively normal in a good location within downtown, for example. However, something to have in mind is that it's all about money, right? I mean, if you're the building owner, you're going to charge as much as you can. There are parts of town where most buildings are charging that, 16 to 18%. And then there's areas of town where are more in the outskirts, for example, that only charge about 14, 15%. So that could be a good thing and a bad thing, the market value. Why? For example, you might have a building that has a very good use of space and is very efficient. And although it's quite unheard of, but let's just assume that you have a building that it has an 8% or even a 10% load factor. But all the buildings around you are charging 16, 18%. You might decide, hey, you know what? I might charge 15% and I'll still be very competitive. So you can see how marketing has a lot to do with this. On the other end, let's say that your building does have a relatively common load factor, which would be, let's say, 16 to 18%. But you're in a part of town where most buildings around you only charge 14 to 15%. Well, you might have to lower that load factor just so that you're competitive with the buildings around your area. So just something to have in mind. Regardless of the load factor you use, you can see that something's happening here. That you might be measuring a building per BOMA standards, but the load factor may not necessarily be per BOMA. It could potentially be what the market bears, and that has to be coordinated with every different building owner that you work with. So Just an idea out there. Not that that's how it's always done, but it's not uncommon to have a building marketed for the surrounding area. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions or comments, please put them on the comments below. Please know that all the comments are read and most of them are replied to, even if it's just to say thank you. And if you have any ideas of what a future project or future theme might be, feel free to put it down on the comments below. As you have seen, some of the latest videos have been based on ideas that viewers just like you have posted on the comments below. Who knows, if you place a subject, your subject could be the next subject that we talk about. So just please leave a comment below. And if it's just to say, hey, thank you for the video, I like the video, hey, those help a lot too. So if you can just take a minute, a second or two to type something in there, it'd be greatly appreciated. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe. Every single subscriber counts. So to all who have already subscribed, thank you. In the meantime, I will leave you here with a few other videos that hopefully you will like. But in the meantime, this is Archie Corner signing out.